Everybody, welcome to this session, which has the title Hamlet 2.0, to consent or not to consent? That is the question. Now, who is going to respond to that question? Well, it's the user who might have to decide whether his attributes, so his personal information, is released to a particular service or not. And this is one of the two key topics during this session. We will have two presentations. The first two will actually deal with issues around consent. And then we have a third presentation that is about how edugain could be married to stork or vice versa. And when you marry, you also have to give consent. So to some extent, this also is related to the consent question. First, we start with a presentation by David Simonsen. David works for the Danish Federation operator, and he will tell us a bit how consent is handled there. So the floor is yours, David.
Thank you very much. Let's see if we can get the slides going. It's over there. Here we are. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, I'm the daily manager of the Danish Federation WAYF, where you're from, which is under the Danish E-Infrastructure Corporation. And I would like to start with a set of acknowledgements. One is to the WAYF team, especially in this case Bjørn Friis, a student programmer who's been doing a lot of the number crunching, but also the rest of the gang. And also the Fraunhofer Institute in Stuttgart, which has supported us very much back in 2011 with the usability studies and a whole set of recommendations that you will see the result of in a minute. The scope of the talk is the Danish way of doing things. This is not a silver bullet that can be picked up by everyone. This is just to frame your understanding that this is how we did it. But of course, everything is available and free to reuse. So just to step back as the first thing to do, what is a consent? The question of what a consent is in fact very simple. It's an old concept. It is to give permission. But it's also a legal construct, which means that you must be able to later withdraw your consent. Just to give a permission is to give a permission. But to consent is also to be able to withdraw your consent at a later stage. Now that is the most basic definition of consent, but there's also another version called informed consent. And informed consent is a little more tricky to handle because now we actually have to make sure that the user understands what is happening. There's much more to informed consent than to the simple consent because there are three principles that we must observe. And one is transparency. There should be an explanation and not just an acceptable use policy of 54 pages, but it has to be so brief and readable that people can in fact understand what is there. There has to be a legitimate purpose, and legitimacy is hard because what is legitimate and not, but there has to be a purpose so the user can actually feel whether it's okay to do this or not. And then, of course, the question of proportionality. How much, in this case, personal information can we hand out or how little? And we have a very good leverage apply there, which is the principle of minimal disclosure. Just some numbers. Back from 2010, where our statistics begin, and up till now, we have had 35 million authentications done by 752,000 user identities. Not necessarily persons, but user IDs going through the system. And the trend is going up. Just to give you a rough impression. When we built WAYF, we started back in 2005, so it's 10 years since we began the journey. In fact, there was a meeting also in 2004, but this is a decade-long struggle to get things working. We started off with investigating the legal requirements. What is this personal information sharing that we are about to do? So we went through a process of legal requirements. Then we did the implementation afterwards. And the thing is that there's personal information and then there's sensitive information. And in our context, there's a distinction there Personal identifiable information is the lot. That is that's defined in the Danish legal regime. But there's sensitive information, and that has to be treated differently. Now, as we were building new things, we took the principle of the precautionary principle, and said, let's just apply consent to everything, both the personal identifiable information and the sensitive. In fact, we were allowed to only go with the sensitive information and use consent in that. But we thought to ourselves, it's much, much easier to phase out and make exceptions and so forth than to phase in something like consent, which is very much, in the face of the user. So, number one, we have to abide by the law. Number two, we had to investigate the legal requirements. Number three, we had to get an approval of our understanding of this. Have we read the texts well enough? Do we have a good understanding? And even the people who wrote the law, the professor Peter Blum at Copenhagen University, the data protection authorities, the consumer protection authorities, agreed that we got it right and that our approach to consent was good. They couldn't really tell how to do that, the implementation, how we could do that. And it took us 3 generations of federated architecture to get where we are today, which is a centralized hub, decentral authentication, but the consent service and the consent management is done centrally. It's not done on the institution side. It's not done at the IDPs. It's done centrally. Now, WAYF is an opt-out infrastructure. This is crucial to the understanding of why we do it this way. WAYF is open. Any user can try to access any service. It's not opt-in where an IDP would point and please open this connection and not that connection. It's open for everyone. So we don't know which services are necessary or not. Now, then we apply consent to everything, which is, seen from our perspective, necessary because we don't have any knowledge about how much needed it is to do your job or your studies. So this was done because the Norwegians told us that opt-in would be very, very difficult to handle. But we can make exceptions. We can turn off the consent dialogue for a particular service. When users from a particular IDP goes to a particular service, we can turn it off. So we can tweak it here and there. And that also goes for Kalmar and EduGain services connected. So also there we have the consent dialogue engaged when you want to go to one of these. This is just an overview to give you a sense of the scale of the system. We have around 145 IDPs connected on this side and about 240 services connected there. They are all connected to the same hub and all engaged. All users for all services meet the consent dialogue provided by WAYF. So going to a service provider, you get redirected to the discovery service. You go home, you authenticate, and then you meet the consent page here, centrally provided by WAYF, the Federation Hub. We'll have a deep look at how what this looks like. If you approve, if you consent, the information is sent over to the service provider, and hopefully you let in. Some concerns when we built this was, of course, and now we have a man in the middle, but that is how things are when you have a hub, a federation hub. You do have a man in the middle. But the good thing about this is that you get a homogeneous user experience. The user experience, when it's the same from time to time, builds trust. Trust in who? In a federation operator. Yes, we're there, we're visible, we're not the IDP, we're not the service provider, we're somewhere in the middle there, but it seems to work. And I have to tell you that we get very few complaints. I think since we went operational with this in 2008, we have had maybe 20, in the range of 10, 20, 30 maybe, people calling, and mostly because their personal information was wrong. And now we can in fact also use this as a handle to get the identity management quality beefed up a bit. So there's no big issue with this. This is not something which is of a big concern to the users. And let's have a look at what it looks like. This is what it looks like. This is the screen that all the users meet. And I will walk you through the elements. And this is where the Fraunhofer Institute, which has a super usability lab and department in Stuttgart come into play because they have helped us a lot with this. Now, first elements, I'm going to work my way down from the very top, is who's providing the service, WAYF, the federation, and the Danish e-infrastructure collaboration. That logo there is new, and when we introduced that about a year ago, people started calling and thought they were being fished. So you have to be very careful about how many logos and NASDAQ cards you present to them here. But next thing we have here is language, choice of language, Danish, English, everything we do is in English, and in Danish, of course. Now, next arrow is the two graphical elements. One logo of the service provider that you're about to access, and one is from the IDP to ensure, what can you say, visually, very quickly that you're heading in the right direction, because as being at the man in the middle, somewhere you don't know, it's nice to know that they know where you're going to. It's probably very hard to read, but it says you're about to log into this dictionary, so this is what it's all about. Number two, the purpose is to provide an online dictionary. The purpose description is the basic for the negotiation about the attribute release, and it's 160 characters long as an SMS, never longer. This is sort of haiku art of, compressing the half page that you receive as a suggestion for what the description is into just this much time. Next arrow here is the action that will take place. The data below is required to access the service. Do you accept to send it from the IDP name to the service provider name? So this is, in fact, what it's all about. Do you accept to send the information over? And that's it. Then we get, it's complicated, there are lots of elements in this page here. We get the attribute types and the attribute values here. So people actually get a feeling for how much information and what information is being transferred. We have had almost violent discussions about whether you should show the values or not, but our principle has been always to do so. With a few exceptions, the social security number has a very long prefix, which we showed for a number of years, but just I think even this year, we now only show the numbers that are in fact perceived as the social security number and not the prefix. Then there are three buttons. No, I do not accept. Yes, I accept. Yes, I accept, and remember consent. To the right is the one that we anticipate people to use the most. The Germans made that very clear. Windows has it the other way around, but because of the direction of reading, you should put that one over here to the right. We did that, and we will see a bit later how the numbers turn out to be. Then there's a question mark where people can get more information about the types of attributes. There's a small house. If it has been aggregated from an attribute store, we can also get information about where it originated from. And then there's the consent management. There's a link where you can manage your consents. You can withdraw consents. There's also a link on the front page of wayf.dk. And if you see that there's any incorrect information here, there's a link, so you can also get that fixed. And then, of course, this is us providing the whole thing. You can find out where we live. You can beat us up. You can even call us if you like. So they get a feeling for that there's some real person and office behind all of this. If you click the question mark, there's a mouse over coming up. Now listen to this. This is our explanation, which we hope is good. This is EduPerson Targeted ID. The pseudonym makes you recognizable to the service without making you identifiable as a person. You get different pseudonyms for different services. It took us about a year to get down to that. And we had a lot of help. These are hard things to tell. But we don't show, the attributes as they are named in the EduPerson schema. We never did, and we never will, because it doesn't make sense. But what it is, we cannot even point to the attribute schema. We have to chew it for them. And the other one is if you see any incorrect personal information, we actually point people to the IDP where they can get this fixed. Now, consent management. If you want to withdraw, you click that and you get to this page. These are the consents that I have already stored, given and stored. And this is a long list of all the ones that I didn't. And I'm not going to walk you through in very great detail here, but if you want to give consent to one of these, and Bob Morgan was the one who actually pointed out that it's better to let people consent when it's not immediately about to happen, when you're not going to the service. But it's very hard to get users into this workflow and actually consider which services they want to consent to. But now they have the possibility. So you can see the types and the values and the purpose description. Then you can give consent, and it would appear over there. If you want to withdraw it, you can see that when it was used and so forth, and you can withdraw your consent. So consent management is, in fact, a very simple transaction, and it has been baked in from the very beginning because it's a legal requirement. What you did not see was the option of adding additional attributes to the release. And why? Well, of course, they're not necessary. We have the principle of minimal disclosure. We have negotiated the attribute release policy. There's no need for more attributes. You should not get a better service. This is what is necessary. And if you introduce a notion of, yeah, I can tick off 5 more attributes, I would get a better service, well, then you're just, fishing for more attributes, and the user gets lulled into this notion of, well, more attributes is better. And I think we have plenty of evidence now that more information is not necessarily better. We have super huge breaches all over the place, and this is a way to contain that problem. Now here comes the really new thing, because we have looked at the statistics and the timing of how users interact with the buttons and the consent dialogue. And over a period of probably 6 months, we got numbers. We got numbers in the area of 5.7 million authentications going through. And that's a bit less than what I showed you before, but we realized that we actually had no tracking of no, I do not consent. That button was not locked. So now we introduced logging for that one. We have the full picture, which I'm going to show you to you. Consent saved previously. That means that people asked us to save the consent, not to be engaged the next time in the dialogue. Takes 86%. So out of the 5.7 million, 86% had actually chosen not to see this again. If they get married, change their name, change their email address, they will be engaged. They will see it again, but as long as their information stay the same, they will not see it. So 14% of the 5.7 million actually they were engaged with this consent dialogue. So those are the numbers that we're going to look at now when we look at the timing of the buttons. We anticipated that the most used button would be, yes, remember consent. But when people actually get there, we have filtered out all those who had already decided to get this dialogue hidden. We see that 22% actually choose to get this remembered by WAYF and not engaged next time. Yes, I accept is 70%. No, I do not accept is 1%. And I think this is crucial. We actually see people deciding not to release the data. And whether this is for services that are necessary for their work, I don't know. We have no insights to that. And then we have user vanished, people that just closed their browser when they got to the page, whatever went wrong, 7%. Now look at this. This is a graph of the complete login loop. And we can see that the spike here is 15% of all logins happens within less than a second. Why is that? Because single sign-on is in play here. So they have logged in to one service, they go to the next one, and boopty, because we have single sign-on, it goes very fast. They had saved the consent, they're not engaged in the consent dialogue, they just log in. And then we have a beautiful bell curve down here, where you can see that people actually spend time looking at the consent dialogue. They do not just click, yes, go on. It takes them a while. And we'll dive into how long it takes them to decide this. So this is the distribution for the complete loop with consent engaged. And you can see there's down here around 2 seconds, 3 seconds. There's a remarkable difference between 1 second and the rest. And then it clings off here. So we even have people who spend as much as a minute almost looking at this. And it's not much text. I mean, you get used to it and you look at the purpose and it's just 160 characters. So it might not be that hard, in fact. And now we look at the individual buttons. So the button in the middle, yes, I accept. The timing of that lies around 2, 3, 4 seconds, something in that ball game. But the button, yes, I accept, remember my consent, takes a little longer. It's 2 words. And the clicking time is constant there. So we actually see a difference here. We see that when you have to make a decision, should I save this or not, it takes you a second or 2 or 3 more. And then the really interesting one is, no, I do not accept. That typically takes a few seconds, but we have a long flat tail behind that, 15 seconds. I mean, you have a very large majority here that have spent time more than just to accept, to actually decline the transaction. So the ground floor here is much, much higher than we saw before, and it's even flat. So now we have a pretty good indication of that people do not just accept. We see that they actually make up their mind and make a decision, and we can see that there's a variation depending on what kind of decision they make here. This is another way of showing the statistical numbers we have. Accept, which we saw was the quickest one, lies around here, around 3 to 4, 5 seconds. This is the upper percentile, this is the lower percentile, and this is the median. Yes, accept and remember, move slightly up in time, and no, I do not accept, then we go up to around 20 seconds as the mean time for that decision. So people actually see it, they think about it, and they decide, hell no. So for the first time, we have had this running for almost a decade now. Now, well, 7 years this has been running. We have now started to looking into the statistics, and we get actually pretty confident that this is not of a big issue to engage the users. Actually, we have had people calling us saying this is the wrong social security number, and that's a very important key. If you have the wrong social security number at your university, you're simply not the right person any longer. So if you can help them fix these kinds of errors, that's a very good thing. Now, future plans and ongoing work in this field and some links. We would like, as many of you here know, we have had furious discussions over the years. Should we consent? Should we not do this? How should it be done? What is just informing the user and so on? Now, one of the things that we would like to provide is a consent dialogue which is branded by the IDP, presented at the IDP's URL. Actually, let it be more IDP-like and the hub go away to let it be more transparent. That is something that we would like to develop, and we have already named the system because we named our systems after our children. This one is not one of our children as such, but we would like to call it Cormac. And that would stand for consent operated remotely, maturely, consistently, and knowingly. Thanks to Andrew for all the good discussion over the years. One thing I would like to see again added here to the statistics is the age distribution, because in many cases we actually get the social security number, and unfortunately in our case we can deduct the age of the person. And sometime we would like to be able to tell you about if young people, for instance, are quicker or slower to do this than the more grown-ups. That is something we would like to look into. Of course, you have heard that Internet 2 with Ken is now working with an NSTIC funding to enhance the work and the systems here. I put you there, Ken. There's a Kantara working group on consent and information sharing led by Mark Lizard. He's looking into consent receipts. One interesting German question that came up a few months ago was, how can you prove that you did not consent? And yep, these kinds of legal questions pop up here and there. We will be the ones to find solutions to these questions. And of course, both groups have been made aware of the usability studies they're all available at the website. So what we have done in this field is very much open. The consent module is as such, the design layouts and all the thoughts that have gone into that, and the consent management system is all part of the Simple Sample PHP package. So with that, I hope that you have a feeling now that consent is not as dangerous as it might appear from time to time, and that experience is there to prove this, and that the users actually don't complain too much. So thank you very much.
I'm sure there will be some questions for David, and as usual, Ken has one of them.
It is great to have hard numbers, David. Thank you so much. They will be chewed on extensively in many different places. One question about the are you providing consent options for service providers outside Denmark via Kalmar or some other vehicle? And if so, do you have a distribution about whether or not people do consent more for Danish SPs versus foreign SPs?
So in many cases, we have lots of commercial service providers providing services to Danish institutions, and I doubt very much that they see this as a Danish service provider or not. In some cases they do. It leads to the question of when is the data traveling abroad, and shouldn't we just, with a flag or the name of the country, indicate that this is going across the border? Now, Amazon does not really tell you, or Google, where the data ends up at. That's an issue. They actually have the law in place to get that information in Norway, but we don't. We have decided not to try to indicate this because subcontractors may change, and we don't really want to have that kind of administration running. But it would in principle be nice to say this is, an EduGain enabled service. No, let's leave out the name EduGain, but this is a service provided by Spain, for instance. Would it make a difference? Maybe. We don't know.
I had a question about the 70% that choose the non-sticky variety. Do you have any idea why they do that? Because for me it is strange that you would click the I agree but not remember button, because you've given your data away, you've given it away, right? If the SP has the data once you have given it away the first time, so why do so many people press the non-sticky I agree button? What do they think that the next time they come to the screen and say no, the SP will forget? Do they actually think the SP will then not have their information?
That has been chewed on, that question. If you say no the second time, does the SP delete the no, they do not. The transaction is this: would you like to hand over this information now? And when it's been handed over, it's been handed over, and there's no feedback loop if you change your mind later on. But you always have the possibility of calling the service or writing them and actually ask them to delete the information. But that is something you have to do yourself. Yeah.
Thinking about this from the perspective, the users want to keep control. There's just the feeling of I'm in control, I'll still get to click to it, and it's my choice whether I click the next time. I would also look this way at the graphs you had, where the accept button had a much shorter click time. I'm thinking this might have been users who already once made the decision, yes, I'm releasing it, but wants to keep the clicking to themselves. So it's just the same screen, I'm clicking again, it's a fast click, and the consent is cached in user's memory.
Absolutely. Mass in the front here, he never says yes, accept, and remember, just to get a feeling for how complicated or how much of a burden is this. I'm in between. Some services I do, some I don't.
One more question? No. Oh, sorry. Okay. To be fair to the other speakers, I suggest that further questions are referred to David directly during the next break, the lunch break, for example. And well, thanks again, David. Now we come to the second presentation about consent, which will be given by Rhys Smith from the UK Access Management Federation, which is not a hop and spoke federation as WAYF.dk, but a full mesh federation. And Rhys is going to present some of the points of their view on consent. And yeah, with that, I give the word to you, Rhys.
Right, hello. Can you all hear me? Awesome. Right. For those of you who don't know me, as Lucas said, my name is Rhys Smith. I am from JISC in the UK. Click, click. I was clicking on the wrong button. So, for those who don't know how to pronounce my name, it is Rhys, as in Reese Witherspoon. The lack of English vowels confuses some people with my name. But no, think of the Hollywood actress. It may surprise you to know that me and my namesake don't share that much in common, other than our name. I am, in fact, neither rich, nor famous, nor female, nor do I have a spoon. Well, obviously I have spoons, but I don't have any with me up on the stage today. For those of you who don't know JISC, we are a charitable organization in the UK. We provide digital solutions to the R&E space in the UK, including the National Research and Education Network, JANET. So we are called JISC and we provide JANET, and that is our story today, and we are sticking with it for a little while anyway. So, what am I talking about? This is not a talk about consent in a precise way as David's very, very interesting talk. This is taking a step back and looking at why consent is important, why we're doing all of this in the first place. It's kind of a little bit aimed at people who might be thinking about starting a federation, so new countries who may be here. It's also aimed a bit at people who might be thinking about re-architecting their federation. This is also a different version of a talk I gave at a different conference last year. The main difference between the two being last year I had 45 minutes, today I have 20 minutes. So the obvious thing to do, of course, is halve the number of slides. But did I do that? No. I decided life is much more interesting with a challenge, so I decided instead to just talk faster. So we'll see how that goes. And also, probably not wasting the first few minutes by talking about my name would have helped, but never mind. So, first of all, what are we actually doing here? This is all about privacy. Privacy, privacy, privacy. Privacy is under attack in general in the world today. We all know this. The revelations of the last few years of NSA and GCHQ and the Five Eyes nations looking at everything we're doing. Do people care? It's argued that people don't care because people don't seem to be reacting too much to the press. People give away their information freely to things like Facebook so they can go play games for free. Actually, I don't buy that at all. People are, in my belief, rational generally. People are rational actors motivated by many things, one of which is greed. People give away their information to get something back, and access to the service they're trying to get is something you're getting back. I do not argue that people are undereducated in this area and don't understand the value of what they're giving away and how quickly that spreads in the ecosystem. But that's a matter of education. That's not a matter of philosophy. I think people do care about privacy. And I care about privacy. So there are two aspects of kind of the private information that's given out that's kind of interesting. One is that a lot of information isn't of very high assurance. What I mean by that is, to give you an example, if any of you know the person, some of you know the person who used to worked for me when I used to work for Cardiff University up until a couple of months ago, called Phil, aka Mini Reese. According to Facebook, and this is after a few drinks, I must say, Facebook thinks that Phil is female and that I am his grandfather, or her grandfather, I should say. That's not particularly accurate. Is that worth anything? It's an interesting question. The thing about the data we deal with in the R&E world is that we actually have assured data, well, more highly assured data. It's more, the data we're passing around in SAML assertions and such forth has an intrinsically higher value because we are vouching for that data. So the data we're using and passing around needs a bit more looking after than people asserting their own information. And another aspect is specifically in the R&E world, but well, also in the business world, anonymous browsing might have real business benefits. So privacy of your identity. Why? The obvious things that people roll out. Protecting information about what you're currently working on. You know, research groups working on something for the next Nobel Prize don't want to let other universities know what they're doing. Traffic analysis, basically. Anonymity is a good thing for business. I keep saying privacy. What do I mean by privacy? Privacy is an extremely overloaded term. In my PhD thesis, I spent at least 40 pages talking about privacy. It might even be more. I try to forget that bit of my life. That was not fun, as some people in the front row may realize. What I'm talking about today is anonymous access, pseudonymous access to resources and personally identifiable information released with appropriate policy and/or consent. CF other talks. When we're talking about this, some good general privacy principles are in play. Privacy by design is number one. When you're architecting a system, whether that system is a small piece of software you're writing or the architecture for a national federation with 1,000 members, you need, if you want privacy to be protected, you need to think about it from the very, very beginning. You can't retrofit privacy or security into things very well. It just doesn't work. You need to think about it from the ground up. Data protection does not equal privacy protection. Data protection laws are a means to an end. The end is protecting consumers. We all get a bit caught up sometimes in the legalities and the minutiae of data protection. We need to step back and think about what we're actually trying to do with this. In the UK, our Information Commissioner is moving more towards a risk-based approach than black and white. Does it meet data protection laws or not? What I mean by that is everything should be about risk-benefit analysis and what you'll get for what you give and how well people tried to protect privacy. Another thing is privacy versus utility. It's a constant battle, especially within the EU because of our data protection laws. We are trying to protect individual and organizational privacy, but also retaining the usefulness of this federated ecosystem we're building. And what it all boils down to is trust versus privacy. Striking a balance is very, very hard. Have we gone too far? Let's have a look in a few slides' time. So, given those principles, where are we today? First of all, I'm going to just go through quickly how the design choice of your federation may influence privacy. And as I said, if you're going to build a federation today, or if you're going to re-architect your existing one, this is where you start thinking about privacy from the very beginning. And the very beginning is the design of the federation. So we have federations today. Web single sign-on federations, non-web federations, doing stuff like access to e-journals, access to web systems, learning platforms, etc., etc. We have R&E federations, we have government federations, we have business federations, we have everything. Two main ways you can design your federation. You can have a mesh federation, like the UK Federation, and like In Common. Every IDP talks to every service directly. No central point. You can have hub and spoke federation, the man in the middle. David, you're the man in the middle. Yep. Every IDP talks to the man in the middle. Every service talks to the man in the middle. Nobody talks to each other directly. Fair enough. There are, of course, hybrid approaches of the two. I'm not going to go into those today because they depend on exactly how you've designed your hybrid approach. And we could take all day. How does this affect privacy? Let's have a look at privacy and utility in the world of the mesh. We have three things. We have the user, we have their identity provider, their home organization, and we have the service they're trying to log into. In the mesh world, the user can remain anonymous to the service they're trying to get access to, which helps with that anonymous browsing thing I was talking about at the start. That's good. So it's in green. If Andrew Cormack was here, he'd tell me off for people who are colorblind, so I'll point it out. That's a good thing, can remain anonymous to the service. The IDPs can tailor attribute release to the service because they know who the service is. There is traceability. I've got the color wrong. That's meant to be green. The IDP can trace which user was doing what. So we have traceability for abuse stuff. And the RP can personalize stuff for the user through things like EduPerson targeted ID. Good. The bad things. The IDP can see which service the users are going to. Is that a bad thing? It could be a bad thing if the user doesn't trust their IDP. We live in a world where most of our users do kind of trust their IDPs, but that's not the same in every context. And the service can see which IDP the user came from. So, for me, the mesh world is very good for privacy on the user end, but less good where you don't trust the IDP or the RP. So, anonymity, pseudonymity is easy. Non-personally identifiable information can be released, but only according to policy. In the hub and spoke world, there's a lot more green here, which is interesting. The user can remain an anonymous service. There is traceability. There is anonymous personalization. But the IDP now doesn't know which service the user is going to, because they just see the user going to the hub. The service doesn't know which IDP the user came from, because they just see the hub. This is the way a lot of government SAML federations are heading. This is the way the Cabinet Office is heading in the UK. There's going to be a SAML-based hub and spoke federation, basically, for all citizens in the UK. The big red mark, the hub sees everything. If you trust the hub, great. Maybe it's my British background. I don't trust anyone, least of all myself. So, good for privacy in many ways, but with one quite major caveat. You can do things to help that with double blinds and triple blinds and, well, it is a double blind, but you can do things like triple blinds with cryptographic stuff going on, but that's kind of new and kind of complex. So, if you're going to go and design a federation today or redesign your federation, you need to think about those things. What's most important to you? Do you think your community will trust you as a hub? Some countries, that works very well. In the UK, probably less so, because nobody trusts anything central. Every attempt we've had to have a national identity system has been shot down in pieces because nobody trusts the government to do anything. Maybe that's just us. So, anyway, what can we do to improve the state of the world? Well, of course, if the goal is privacy protection, then we've achieved it, because nobody's releasing any attributes to anybody. Yay! So, job done. The problem is that's not what we're aiming for. We're actually looking to, in the trust versus privacy battle, privacy is winning very heavily. We want to tip the scales slightly and end up in a slightly more pragmatic place. So what can we do to shift the balance? So a little review of what we're doing at the moment, for those of you who are unaware. We are doing things like the Data Protection Code of Conduct, which is an attempt to help IDPs in their decision making. It's a way of a service signaling that they respect data protection law, which is nice. And it makes use of things called entity categories, which are a way of annotating entities in SAML metadata with specific properties, one of which is I support the Data Protection Code of Conduct. Another one of which is I support the Research and Scholarship category. Now, for me, the Data Protection Code of Conduct is all about reducing the risk that when you're releasing private information to a service. You're reducing the risk because they have self-asserted that they aren't going to go and sell your information to some marketing company. Doesn't stop them doing it, but it helps reduce the risk. To me, RNS is about increasing the benefit. The RNS category is about annotating a service that it is to do with interaction and collaboration in the research and education community. It's about things like wikis and things that people use to try to get their job done. So that's about increasing the benefit. So anything that can be used to help people make a more intelligent decision is a good thing, because they are more likely to actually think about it rather than just say no. And when I say people here, I mean the IDP administrators. Take a quick aside to have a look at, of course, I have to talk about Moonshot. It's contractually, I'm contractually obliged. Moonshot, if you don't know it, well, you must know it by now, we've talked about it enough, is a next generation access management system, federated access management for everything, with many caveats. It's not going to rule the world. It has its drawbacks, but it does enable some new stuff. We have spent several years developing this. We launched a service called Just Consent in March, so we now have a production service in the UK based on Moonshot, which the e-infrastructure crowd are typically using for access to things like HPC facilities and stuff like that. So what does privacy look like in that scenario? Well, it's just like everything else. You can deploy Moonshot in a mesh model, or you can deploy Moonshot in a hub and spoke model. So if you're going to go do it, you need to think about what your trade-offs are. And that's entirely up to you. We have done a few things in the technology to make it a little bit more interesting, which is around how entities find each other. We don't have SAML metadata. We don't have metadata like in SAML. We don't have a hierarchy like in Eduroam. We have something called the trust router, which allows Moonshot entities to securely locate each other. And it's multi-layered trust network. What I mean by that is, when you join the trust router, you are a part of the underlying trust infrastructure, where your organization, the way we've structured this is your organization is validated to a particular standard. And the Just Consent model is very similar to the certificate OV model. So everyone who is a member of it has been verified in terms of the organization. On top of that, you can layer different communities, and these can be managed by members of the community themselves. The idea being, the core joining the trust network is quite simple. We just check that if Microsoft are a member, that it is Microsoft, not somebody pretending to be Microsoft, and that's it. Nothing else. Everything else lives within the communities. And those communities can have their own policies in terms of registration LOA, authentication LOA, attribute release requirements, privacy policy, data protection, conduct, stuff like that. So if you really, really have a need for personal information, you can stick it in the policy, create a community for yourself, stick it in the policy. If people want to join it, then they follow that policy. And what that ends up looking like is we have a trust network which is kind of distributed, made up of every entity, where the colors don't matter, but imagine one are IDPs and one are RPs. Then you have the whole trust network, and some of them may be a part of one community, some may be a part of another, and some may be a part of another one, and they overlap. So it's kind of a very complex graph. Anyway, that's Moonshot. I won't talk more about that. What I will do is slow down a bit, because I only have 3 slides left, and talk about what are we actually trying to do anyway. We all get up here and we all talk about the latest things we've been doing, and sometimes we repeat ourselves every year because we don't seem to be going anywhere. Sometimes we do have quite interesting information. That was really, really interesting seeing the numbers from David. But it's always good to take a step back and take stock of what we're actually trying to do. So, look at the requirements from our customers. What are we, we can run federations because we think they're interesting and because we're paid to do it, but ultimately we're trying to enable something here. So what do our customers want? 3 kinds of customers are at play. We have services. What do the services want? Well, they want the moon on a stick, to use a particular British phrase that a lot of you may find confusing. It means you want everything, and you want it now. They want things to be easy for the users to use. The more complex things are, the more likely they are to go away. So they want it to be as easy as possible. They want federated authentication, so they don't have to manage passwords. A lot of big services, especially in the publishing world, who don't particularly want to own your identity, spend a lot of time managing usernames and passwords. They want to get rid of that. They want in some contexts, they want high assurance identity. They want to know who you are. They want to know everything about you so they can control access really, really, in a really fine-grained manner. They want a rich attribute ecosystem so they can make these really complex decisions. And they want it all for free. On the IDP side, one of the needs is the same. Everything else is kind of different. That one need is they want to enable things. They want things to be easy for the users because they want the users to go and make use of the tools that are out there so they can go and work with other people and do really interesting things. In the R&E space, that means, creating new ways of learning, researching into, really, really interesting brand new topics. They want people to collaborate with other partners, and they want to happen easily. They want users to be able to discover services easily. Brilliant. But they want all of this to happen in a way that fits their current identity management capabilities, because upgrading the identity management capabilities of an organization in terms of knowing exactly who your users are, keeping it completely up to date, deleting accounts when people have gone, not giving the vice chancellor friend who turns up and needs access to the Wi-Fi a username and password because we haven't checked his passport yet. To stop doing all of that can be really, really expensive for home organizations and is cultural change. So not only is it monetarily expensive, it's culturally expensive. So it's not going to happen fast. So ultimately, what IDPs want is an attribute ecosystem that's low risk, high benefit, easy to manage, and fits within their current capabilities, or where they need to increase their capabilities will move slowly enough that people can adapt. Last on this list, users. Absolutely should be first, but I put it last. What do users want? The users list is very simple. They want to get their job done. They don't give a damn about any of this stuff we're talking about that we find interesting. They just want to do stuff. They want to get out there and collaborate. They want to work on papers with each other. They want to talk to each other. They want to do it as quickly and easily as possible, and as sexy as we think as sexy as we think AAI is, because of course we all think it's ultra sexy, just like this microphone I'm wearing. Any AAI that gets in their way is a problem. It's getting in their way. They want it to be completely invisible. Now, these three sets of requirements don't fit very well. So something has to give somewhere. We're not going to make it easy, free, and invisible. So we all have to make compromises somewhere. So, back to my actual question, have we gone too far? Do we have too much success in the world of privacy? Then I have two answers, yes and no, which is very helpful, I know. Yes, we have gone too far. We are stifling our users. We are actively getting in their way. We are stopping them from doing things. Something is wrong. But, on the flip side, no, we haven't gone too far because privacy is important. Anonymity is important. So what do we do? I wish I could stand up here and give a magic bullet, but of course I haven't because we've all been thinking about this for a long time. All I can say is we have to remember to be a bit more pragmatic, and we have to work with our community to get them to be a bit more pragmatic. None of this is black and white. We need to help our community think more from a risk-benefit point of view than a black and white legal compliance point of view, because we are stopping our users from doing stuff. What I mean by that, I'll give you an example. Cardiff University in the UK, where I used to work. Always good to have a name check for my previous employers. We assumed for a very long time that everyone in the UK, every IDP, would not want to release personally identifiable information, like a name and an email address. A few months ago, went to the governance people at the university and said, we want to support this new RNS category thing, which will release a user first name and a last name and an email address to services which are to do with our own research and scholarship for for collaboration stuff. And I expected them to come back and say, no, we're not going to release any personally identifiable information. We'll be sued, or we'll be on the front of the Daily Mail. And they came, I sat down with them for an hour or so and explained what all of this was about. And they came back and they said, yeah, sounds reasonable. The user is making the decision to go to the service in the first place. We're only releasing a name and an email address, which we publish on the website anyway. All of our members of staff have their names published on the website somewhere. The university email addresses is given to them for business use, and when they're making use of services, they're using it for business purposes. So our governance people said, yeah, no problem. With one caveat, which is we should announce that we're making this change so that people who really care can opt out. So we're announcing it, and then we're just going to make the change. We talked to the current president of the student union, who said, I cannot believe you're not doing this already. Because our students are used to making this decision themselves when they're using Facebook to release stuff which may or may not be true about them. So, I think we all need to take a step back and start being a little bit more pragmatic and talking to our community and making them be a bit more pragmatic about all of this. Obviously, we have laws that we have to follow, but we can be more pragmatic about it. And I think that's about all I have to say. So thank you very much.
We have time for maybe one or two questions. Starting with...
Nobody passed the microphone to Niels.
Hi, Reese. I noticed in the slides where you were comparing mesh federations to hub and spoke that traceability is seen as a bad thing. It was in red at the IDP in a mesh network, but in a hub and spoke it was green at the. What's the deal?
You missed the point I made that I colored that particular word wrong.
Oh,
that was meant to be green.
My apologies. Okay, so
traceability is always useful in these scenarios for abuse purposes, if nothing else.
And then the follow-up question is, will you be coming to Internet 2 Global, or not Global Summit, TechX in the fall?
I don't know, probably.
Because it would be really cool to see you do something focused on IDP operators about that last part,
Yep.
where you talk about being practical, because I think that's something that a lot of, maybe 50-50 of the IDPOs in Common are maybe a little bit slanted towards too risk averse, and the other 50% are potentially prevented from doing what they think is the right thing by, say, their registrars. So it would be really cool to see you do something sort of focused on that practicality.
I mean, it's something we'll be focusing on in UK Federation for the coming year or so. So I'm happy to talk about our experiences doing it.
Cool, thanks.
And I guess if we have to, Niels.
Okay, Niels, one small question, please.
In your slide where you listed the feature list for your IDPs, it stated we want both a low risk and a highly usable set of attributes, which is clearly orthogonal, completely orthogonal, I would say. Who's actually making that statement within your institutions? I mean, if this is, the one statement could be coming, I guess, from the legal department, the other one from the tech department. So is there not somebody else who should
In terms of low risk, high benefit, I wasn't talking about particular attributes. I was talking about the services users are trying to use. So low risk, high benefit services. So maybe, well, it depends which context you're coming from. For us, things like collaboration wikis are really low risk, high benefit. For students in the UK, then sites which give them discount on burgers from McDonald's are probably quite high benefit. And give you discount in Apple is quite high benefit. Deciding low risk, high benefit on an per attribute basis is actually, in fact, not only going to be difficult within an organization, it's going to differ from person to person, probably. And that's where individual user consent comes in. And get the user involved in the flow. Anyway, I think I can hear the violins playing. So.
Yeah, before you go, let's thank Reese again. Now, before we get to the last presentation of this session, I would like to remind you that there are posters downstairs. There are 3 in particular that might be of interest to you. One is about edu teams from SurfNet. There is one demonstrating the SEMPA-based virtual organization system by Renater. And there is a 3rd one about PRUN from our Czech colleague. So these are 3 out of, I think, almost 30 posters that might be of interest to you if you're bored during the lunch break, for example. Okay, well, with that, we come to the last, but certainly not least, presentation today. It's by Jordi Ortiz from University of Murcia, and he's going to tell us how EduGain could be married to Stork or vice versa. And yeah, the word is yours.
Thank you for the introduction. Behind this title, which is really nice, as Lucas said, I'm going to speak about merging the EduGain Federation with the Stork. Basically, the Europe, since its conception, has eased, so they tried to make possible mobility for the citizens, right? As a consequence, it's necessary to have mobility on the electronic field also. So when I move to another country, or when I want to do something on another country, I want to do it also with my electronic ID, if it's possible. Of course, in the scholar environment and research, we go always a bit faster than government, so we have started already to have this kind of collaboration, and several successful programs have been done in Europe, the Erasmus Plus, Erasmus Mundus, so really nice. But still, it's not an electronic stuff. When I move to another country as an Erasmus student, I still have to register in that university or do something like that to have the access to the electronic things, if they don't support the EduGain, or it depends. So basically, here we have EduGain, which is a research and education worldwide interfederation, which is present in Europe, the Americas, Africa, Asia. It's a policy framework with 32 federations and 3 which are coming soon. And in front of that, we have STORK, which is aimed to be the European e-identifier interoperability platform, which is integrated by 19 member states. And it's governmental and geopolitical. What we mean with this is that the governments support it and manage it. And geopolitical because really it depends on the localization as the countries are, right? And it uses not only where you are or where you want to access, but also where you come from, right? If we see side by side, EduGain and STORK, their characteristics, EduGain is based on SAML to int, which is a profile of SAML, really. It has single sign-on. In front of it, we have a STORK, which uses the SAML STORK, which is an extension. So it's not native to translate STORK to SAML STORK to SAML to int, and the other way around. Also, STORK doesn't have a single sign-on because, as David said, the consent is very important. In this case, the STORK people thought, or we thought, that the user should give consent each time he wants to access a service. So each time a service wants to get the information from the user has to consent to give it, right? About the architecture, EduGain is composed by the MDS, the metadata distribution service, the discovery service, identity providers, and service providers proxy. And basically the main part of the infrastructure of STORK is the PEPS, which is a pan-European proxy service. So each member state has its own PEPS, and it's the point where the trust between each state is done. The next row, we say that EduGain is automatically delegated infrastructure and distributed, at least potentially. In front of the rigid and country-controlled infrastructure and centralized from STORK. What we mean here is that in EduGain you have the possibility to have several IDPs which can be trusted in between federations, and so an SP from a federation can trust an IDP from another federation, and the full mesh and that so on. But in STORK you have only one IDP per country and no way to have more than one IDP per country. Okay. Each country manages its own IDP, and that's where all the users come from in that country. The EduGain uses the EduPerson principal name or the EduPerson targeted ID as a main attribute to identify a user, right? Meanwhile, the STORK has the e-identifier, which is defined per country. So each country has its own e-identifier, and they have full possibilities to do whatever they want, each country. And meanwhile, EduGain is in production for quite a long time. STORK is still in pilot status. We hope we finish the pilot in September, hopefully, and let's see what happens with it. Well, as you may know, and I think you could know better than me this slide, EduGain has several possibilities. You have the full mesh federation, in which IDPs from federations can be trusted by other SPs from other federations. You have the central discovery service, but you could have a discovery service also on the SP, and well, a lot of possibilities. You have the hub and spoke, on which you have a central abstraction to for the SPs and for the IDPs also. Not all of, you have an 80% of in data from 2013, 80% were full mesh, 15% were hub and spoke, and you have another option which is 5%, which would be a decentralized one, where you have only one IDP, which is more similar to Stork than the other ones. I'll go slower with Stork because I think it's less known by the audience. This is a really high-level architecture picture of Stork. I want you to take a look at country 1, right? We take it as a reference, okay? So each country has two PEPs, one which is the service side, let's say, PEPs, and one which is the citizen side PEPs, okay? All the server-side PEPs are connecting with other countries' CPEPs, okay? Meanwhile, the CPEPs is connecting with the SPEPs, okay? Even between within the same country, the PEPs are connected. When a user from country 1 wants to access an SP from country 2, he would go to the country 2 SP. There, he would be asked about where does he come from, or at least where does he want his data to be recovered from. So he needs an identity from that country. After that, automatically it goes to the same country PEPs, SPEPs, which has a trust relation with the SP, of course, and is redirected to the CPEPs, so his home PEPs. There is a direct trust relation also here, so this is step 3, it goes here, and then he gets identified. During this identification, there must be an explicit request for identification, which means that the user at this step could directly reject. So it's like that. You could authenticate yourself or not. And after that point, you can select where do you want each attribute to be recovered from. So you could get an attribute from one university, another attribute from your bank, and another attribute from your health insurance, for instance. And then you have several steps to go to each attribute provider to recover those attributes. On each of these attribute provider, you have to be asked to get your attributes. Okay? Then you go back, and then you get to the service, if you give all the attributes which are needed for having the service. So, now that we have taken a high-level look to both federations, we are going to speak on how to merge these two federations. Basically, there are two scenarios which are quite logical: a Stork user which is visiting an EduGain service provider, or an EduGain user who is visiting a Stork service provider. It is clear for us that we need a nexus element, right, that needs to combine both worlds. One option is having this element working as a proxy, as a Stork IDP or SP, where the translation between the SAML2 int to the SAML2 Stork should be done, right? And also the attributes should be matched, or acting as a Stork PEPs. We want to see this second option as, we like to see this second option like a virtual country. So, because really the difference between being a proxy, which is a service provider or attribute provider or IDP also, acting as an IDP or acting as a PEPs, is a difference in how the trust relation is done. In the case of the proxy, it could become a part of the country infrastructure of Stork, and from the Stork point of view, of course. On the other way around, it would be like another country. So there should be a direct relation with the PEPs, with each country PEPs. So each country would decide. So in the first use case of a Stork user visiting an eduGain service, first I will go to the PEPs alternative. So our man in the middle would act as a PEPs. In this case, it would act as an SPEPs. So the steps, I don't know if you can see fine, are the following. You go to, let's say that Spanish user is going to an SP which is Greek, but it's in eduGain, so this thing doesn't mind very much. He goes to the SP, and then the SP redirects the user to the eduPEPs. This eduPEPs, which is acting as a PEPs, could be deployed at different levels. We could have, for instance, Greek eduPEPs, which would be for all the Greek federations, right? And a regional level eduPEPs, let's say, for instance, the North region, the South region, or research centers, whatever you like to combine. Or you could have, for instance, an Europe level eduPEPs, which would be the only one for all of them. Or you could have all of them and then have your policies, of course, like you want. So after that, you go to the eduPEPs. And on the eduPEPs, because of how I said Stork is working, you have to ask for the user country. So here we would ask this user, where do you come from? Or where do you want to go to get your attributes? After that, we would go to the SPEPs. Sorry, we could go to the Spanish CPEPs, right? Because we are acting as a SPEPs. So really, once we know the country, we go directly to the country, and then we have the identification and the attribute recovery as I have explained before. Or you could go through the national level eduPEPs. We could also directly speak with the Spanish PEPs. The Spanish PEPs could trust this one or this one or this one or not this one. It's just a decision of the deployment. So in this case, there is no need to be part of the state deployment. It's optional, so it's a decision. And we can do aggregation levels, as I said. Meanwhile, on the proxy alternative, this same user would go to the service-related eduGain proxy, which is within Stork, and then here it would be acting as a service provider from Stork. So the user would be asked again, what's your country? And would go to the local, so the country service PEPs, which would be the one that would go to the user PEPs, and then again recover the attributes. Whoops, sorry. As I said, in this case, from the point of view of Stork, there is no need to extend the web of trust of Stork. So each, from their point of view, they have each member state relation, and there would be no need to do new relations from PEPs to PEPs. The other way around, if it's working as a PEPs, we have an eduGain user, which is accessing a service provider from eduGain. It would go to the eduPEPs again, and it would be redirected to an eduGain to the eduGain service. So here we would have the mechanism, the discovery service mechanism, to select which IDP and which where are we going to get our attributes from, right? The other way around, when we have it as a proxy, the user would access again the Greek SP, which could go to the Greek edugame proxy, which is part again of Stork. Oh, sorry, I'm missing it. The Greek SP would go to the SPEPs, and it would be redirected to the user's CPEPs, right? Where optionally we could have this identification, but it should be because the CPEPs automatically ask for the authentication of the user to know that it's a legal user, and then it would be sent to the edugame proxy, and again we have the selection mechanism to recover our attributes, and have again the translation from SAML int to SAML stork and the attributes. There is a need to go through the user's CPEPs, as I say here. So with this, we would have integrated the edugame wall with the stork wall. The other way around, if we are using the edupeps, I'm going backwards. Sorry. Yes, I was going backward. To do this work, we have a team of 3 entities. GRNet, which is giving us the support for the edugame part, and the University of Aegean and University of Murcia, which are part of the STORE project. So in summary, we want to make work together, this edugame and Stork, although there are big differences between them. We have 2 options here, as I said, having the proxy, which is, let's say, more interesting for the Stork side, and having the edupeps, which we think is more is potentially better for integrating. But still, we need Nexus in that sense, and the 2 scenarios here. Thank you for your time.
We still have time for a few questions. Everybody is ready for lunch? Well, now you showed how edugame and Stork could be connected. Well, one thing I wondered was, from the Stork policy, would it be allowed for an edugame user to actually access a Stork service? Or are there some restrictions, for example, on level of assurance or other things that would make it impossible for an edugame user to access a Stork service?
Not really. Stork has a quality assurance, attribute assurance levels, so that those could be used by the states to give a certain level to edugame, let's say. So if you are coming from edugame, maybe I give you a AQAA, which is the name of that attribute of 1, and if you come with your real identification from your state, let's say, then I give you a AQAA of 5. And then it's a matter of the service provider if they accept a low level identification or not.
How many levels are there?
I think it was 5 or 6, but I really don't know right now.
You probably should have a look at that, because level of assurances are also an upcoming topic for us.
Yeah.
Any further question from the audience? No? Well then, let's thank Jordi again.
Thank you for your attendance.
Thanks to all the speakers of this session, and with that I would like to release you to the lunch break. Thank you very much.